today's Navigating ADHD. And we're fortunate with individuals who are working in the field and or are part of the roundtable panel. We have Sam Munslow. We'll get a chance for her to introduce herself, give her a bit more background so I don't miss anything out. Just a moment. She runs her own company. She'll tell you more about herself. And we have Roxie Coleman as well. And she's involved in running a training company up in Bradford. We also have Chris Marsh, who will share his experience, personal journey. He runs his own company as well, tell you a bit about himself. And plus we have Nick Blatchley, who's a copywriter. Have some burning questions that you want to ask today about ADHD. It's an important topic area. At the same time, what is it we can do to help these individuals? We are going to allow individuals to at least give a bit of a background about themselves. So Sam, would you like to just say 30 seconds about yourself?
Hi, I'm Sam Munslow. I'm an ADHD specialist coach, mental health coach, headship coach, really. I have ADHD, got my diagnosis a couple of months ago, 97th percentile. So, you know, if you're going to do it properly. And so I'm working with a lot of people who are also later diagnosis. Oh, and my background's education. I was a primary school teacher and deputy head.
Thank you, Sam. Roxie.
Hi, I'm Roxie. I run a training company. We work with young individuals 16 to 25 that have learning difficulties, disabilities and autism to gain independent paid employment. And we also advocate for and educate businesses and employers in neurodivergency awareness and unconscious bias, reasonable adjustments, all those kind of things.
Thank you. Chris.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So my name is Chris Marsh. So I am a root cause therapist. So I use analytical hypnotherapy as my my vehicle for helping people with ADHD essentially resolve all of the trauma of being neurodiverse and step into their full potential. So I come from the IT industry originally, and I confirmed I was ADHD 2 years ago. Looking forward to having a chat.
Thank you. And Nick.
Yes, good evening. I'm Nick Blatchley. I'm a copywriter. As far as I know, I don't have ADHD, but you never know. But in recent times, I've been becoming very much more aware of just how important it is to build diversity, and particularly build neurodiversity into business communication, because as far as ADHD is concerned, for instance, a far higher proportion of entrepreneurs have it than the general public. So I've been trying to educate myself and to pass on that education to other people in business.
Thank you. Excellent. So we got a good panel there in terms of background and experiences within ADHD or in associated environments. So the format today is to ask a number of questions to the panel. And if you have any questions you'd like to ask yourselves, just put it in the chat and I can put that forward to the panel. So we're going to start off. One of the questions being, what are some of the common misconceptions about ADHD and how can we combat them? We'll repeat that. What are the common misconceptions about ADHD and how can we combat them? Who'd like to go first? I think Sam was itching at that one, maybe, or maybe Roxie.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think so. My background's education, and when I first started teaching, I remember ADHD first became a thing, and it was little Brian, who was 7 years old, really skinny because he ran around all of the time, couldn't read because he couldn't sit still at all, couldn't write, really badly behaved. And so they put him on Ritalin and he turned into a zombie. And honestly, he lost his soul. It was horrible. That is what we thought ADHD was in the olden days. And I still think that there's an element of that. So when I tell people that I have ADHD and they go, but you're successful. You've got a career, you've got a family, you run a house. And so there's the misconception that if you have ADHD, you can't function. So that's one of the things. There's also the big difference between men and women and children and adults, and how it presents in very, very different ways for all of us. And also, if you have ADHD, it doesn't mean you've got the same symptoms and behaviours as somebody else who has ADHD. I am very, very organised. I have wonderful strategies to, I mean, I've got 4 children. I run a house. I've got my own business. It's very successful. So I must be organised, but I have ADHD. So that's, to me, that's one of the biggest misconceptions, is that if you've got ADHD, you're clearly just running on a motorway and running around on a motor all of the time. I'm not. I absolutely am not. I do stop. My head is running all of the time. It's very different.
Interesting. Thank you for that thought on that question, Sam. Maybe Roxie or Chris could enter at this stage. The thoughts on this?
Sure, yes. So for me, the key thing is that it's not a disorder. It absolutely is not a disorder. It's just a different physiology. And, with any neurodiversity, we just have lots of traits that differ a lot from the more common ways of how people behave and function. So that different physiology gives us lots of superpowers, essentially, that neurotypical people don't have. So, as Sam was saying, everybody with ADHD has slightly different traits, because you've got a baseline physiology that ADHD is a part of, and then it's all of your behaviors, all of your actions, all of your traumas and experiences that are laid on top of that create personality. So essentially, the key thing I work with is the trauma of being neurodiverse, all the experiences of being different, all the experiences that create this feeling of, why am I different to everybody else? Why can't I act and behave like these other people I'm being told I should be able to? So, there's an amazing article I found recently via ADD Attitude that somebody did a study, I can't remember who, that they worked out by the age of 10, a neurodiverse child will have had 20,000 more negative feedback experiences than their neurotypical counterparts. You're not listening, you're not paying attention, you're not sitting still, you're not understanding, you're not getting it, you're daydreaming too much. You could do better if you applied yourself, which was my school reports constantly. So all of these things mount up, and they work this out on a daily basis. So that's what creates the low self-worth, the low self-love, that huge fear of rejection, RSD, the imposter syndrome, the people-pleasing, and that's huge. And what doesn't happen is our amazing superpowers, are amazing skills, and never celebrated, because that's just not part of the assessment criteria that they have in schools. Their definition of what good looks like does not match our physiology. So that's why, for me, my experience of ADHD might be different to Sam's, for example, or different to Roxie's or anybody else's. It's the experiences laid onto that, and the experiences you have. And it's fascinating. I see the difference between people who have early diagnosis and late diagnosis, even in the same family, can be quite dramatic.
So your description then of
Sorry, there's a bit of background noise, so if you can go on mute. I think you to mute Hamza, I think. There we go.
So your description, Chris, of the kind of things that, all the negative things that are told to you, not listening, not behaving, very different for me. So what I heard instantly was the boy description. The girl description: you're so emotional, you're such a drama queen, you make it all about you. Why are you such a crybaby? Why do you have to make a mountain out of a molehill? And can you focus thing? Absolutely. But away with the fairies was one that I always had. Off in her own little world.
Me
Which
too.
sometimes was great, but sometimes it was not great. And yeah, I love the way you describe the kind of the baseline And then we've all got the different layers on top, which is exactly the same for neurotypical people in a different way. Because if you look at neurotypical people, we've all got to, they all have different personalities. And we don't see that as, we don't lump everybody neurotypical in the same and say, well, you all need to like cheese then, and you all need to like Star Wars. But we do say that with neurodiverse people, don't we? We assume that we are all the same. And how to combat it? Well, absolutely education. Stop saying to children in school, sit still, and about you could reach your potential. And stop in assemblies. I think we spoke about this one in the last time, not in assemblies, in parents' evenings. Stop talking neurotypically to the parents about their child, because if you talk about a neurotypical expectation, then the parents are going to see that their children are failing all of the time. Whereas if you talk about them in a neurodiverse way, it's very different. That, they could reach their potential. Actually, they're doing really well at this.
Interesting. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah.
Roxie, you're in the education arena. I'll come back to Nick in just a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's quite interesting. So we do an awful lot of work around challenging language, a lot. And this sort of buys into what Chris was saying and what Sam was just saying about being in school and all those kind of things. And one of the things that goes through their gorgeous little brains before they're 7, when they have everything they need to move forward in life, is what's wrong with me? And the teacher has probably looked at them and gone, oh, for goodness sake, what's wrong with you? Or in their heads, they've thought that. And as a parent, I know I've said it to my kids. I know I have. I have definitely said to my kids when they haven't understood my instructions how to do something, oh, for goodness sake, what's wrong with you? Come on, guys. All I'd ask you to do was change the washing over. What was wrong with them, or actually what was wrong with my instructions that I understand, but I didn't take into account how they understand. So it is very much the misconceptions around ADHD are, like Sam said, flying around the walls, etc., and they present so differently. One of the things I'm finding is there are an awful lot of reels coming up on my Instagram, my Facebook, TikTok, if you have TikTok. And it's someone there saying she's got ADHD, he's got autism, and and it's like, these are ADHD traits. No, there's some ADHD traits, but not everybody will have those. And then you've got others sort of saying, well, these are ADHD, and I'm identifying with some of them. And I think there's an awful lot out there. It's good that people are talking about it and they're kind of normalizing ADHD, which I think we need to do. We need to make ADHD part of the neurodiverse world as opposed to neurodivergent and neurotypical. We're a neurodiverse world, and this is how we should be. And we should be doing everything that encompasses everyone or as many people as possible. One of the things, Chris, you might hate me for this, I'm not sure. You said it's not a disorder. I get it, and I agree, because disorder has negative connotations. However, if you think about disorder, basically ADHD does not work in the neurotypical, ordered, straightforward way that we are in this world and we've been set up to work. It is disordered because it is disordered. So I'm going to challenge your use of not saying it's not a disorder. Kind of is. But actually, what we need to do is challenge these negative connotations that come with all these things. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that all these misconceptions tend to be negative. And even if the misconceptions were positive, then actually, what crack on? It's this negativity all the time, and this disability, different ability. It's an ability. I have an ability to do 20,000 things at one time. I have an ability to crack out 3 days worth of work in one day. I know the next day I'm going to be exhausted and I'm going to be nuisance or ornament to anyone. And I don't have a diagnosis yet. So it's about challenging those negative misconceptions, I think.
Thank you, Roxie.
And the use of disorder is one of those for me. I mean, because what that does, it's about not necessarily underlying the meaning of the word disorder. It's how it's used in society. It's how it's applied. It's how it's used to label people to make them feel less than anybody else. So, what I see a difference between people, typically, not always, who get a young diagnosis, it can define them. So what happens is the things that we get told in childhood, we tell ourselves in adult life. So if we're always told we're stupid, we'll tell ourselves we're stupid in adult life, right? So what can happen is parents can say, oh, it's because of Chris's ADHD, he behaves like that. Oh, it's just his ADHD. It's just so then you when you get older, you say, I can't do that because I've got ADHD. I can't. It's just my ADHD. I can't do that. So it creates a sense of being different, being less than anybody else, and that's the trauma coming out of ADHD. And actually, it's challenging that and saying, no, actually, okay, you have some challenges of fitting into a neurotypical world that's not designed for you, essentially. But actually, let's celebrate the incredible things you can do that make you stand out from everybody else. So, you know, Nick quite rightly pointed out that a large chunk of entrepreneurs are neurodiverse. You kind of have to be to say, right, I don't believe that. I don't want to fit into that mold. I don't want to fit into that little square box of auto we should be in. I don't want to believe that thing. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do my own thing. I do things my own way. All the best scientists, musicians, creative people all have some sense of neurodiversity to be able to say, no, hang on, I don't believe that. I'm going to hyper-focus on this until I prove it. And if I can't, I'll find something else to hyper-focus on. And that's, for me, really, the essence of my work is allowing people to let go of the trauma of being different, being made to feel different, and actually recognize how the physiology works and to really comfortably step into that and step into that being the superpowers, the real skills that set them apart in life.
Thanks, Chris. And I'm going to go over to Nick, and also I'm going to comment on something in the chat in just a moment. So, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, the point I was going to make is actually very similar to what Roxie said. Is the idea that there's neurotypical and neurodivergent and a huge gulf between them. And it's much more useful to think of it more as a spectrum. Obviously, there are specific neurological differences, but it's not sort of two worlds separated that can never meet.
You, Nick. There's a comment here from Neil Baker. I agree that it needs to be considered as a disorder just for claiming benefits, tuition and help. Interesting.
Do you mind if I pick that one up?
Okay, Roxie.
Because I agree, and it's awful, and I don't want to agree. We see all the time. So at 16, they're coming to us, and the parents are trying to apply for PIP or for and UC and all those bus passes, all those kind of things. When they come to us and ask us about PIP or an EHCP, those kind of things, I have to say, and I have to be really honest with them, and it pains me because as a parent, you like to see your child in the most positive way. And as a person, we like to see people in positive ways, as we're just talking about right there. But actually, when you're writing a PIP claim, the idea is that you put down your child's or your person, whoever you're writing it for and helping, at the worst possible and their worst moments, at their worst time, at their worst behaviours and everything, to be able to gain the payments for the things that you need. I'm not saying gain PIP just so you get a disability car, etc. Even if you're perfectly capable of working and buying a car, and you shouldn't be doing that. But if somebody needs PIP for certain things, then they have to put themselves at the worst possible moment and write that down on paper in order to be believed. And it's horrible. And I agree now, that's one of the reasons the disorder is the negative side of it. I think we should be pushing for disorder to be called disorder and have a little break in the middle of it when we say it. But it is, we have to make it sound absolutely bloody awful, that they're absolutely useless, can't do anything. And I think that might be something, Raj, actually, for another.
Yeah, I mean,
another session.
Exactly. Now, I think.
How do we make changes?
We have. Let's go back to the comment again. Sam says I'm more inclined to call it disability than disorder from her perspective.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it was a disability until I learned about it and created the strategies to thrive with them. Thanks, Sam. Then we've got Nick Blanchard. The comment about doing 20,000 things at once is valid, but too often I feel like I'm doing none of them well. So I think we can relate to that. And we got Neil saying, yes, I also have, if you don't mind me saying, Nick, you obviously put it in the chat, bipolar disorder, but it is a recognized disability. So it's good to get the interaction from the team here.
Well, it's interesting that when you look at the diagnosis criteria for borderline personality disorder, for bipolar, for ADHD, there's not a lot of difference. There's one difference between BPD and ADHD, that's suicidal ideation. And if you've had all the trauma of being neurodiverse, you very quickly get to a point of suicidal ideation. And I think there's a lot of misdiagnosis in the mainstream healthcare where they focus on BPD, they focus on bipolar, or something else, and actually completely miss the fact that an individual could be ADHD or autistic or both.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you for that, Chris. There's a lot of good insights into that.
The actual label that we have. ADHD is really such an unfriendly label. Attention deficit. So how many people here who have ADHD have an attention focus ability? It's not a deficit. Hyperactivity suggests that you are running around like little Brian, like a dervish. I'm not hyperactive. In fact, I consider myself to be one of the laziest people in the world because I'm so disorganized that I rush around, not run around like a dervish, but try to get things done. And my head is just full of everything I haven't done and need to do. And this was me before I got my diagnosis. And then I'd go for a nap or I'd spend the next day in bed. I used to be ashamed when my children would come home and say, oh, is mum having a nap? And I thought, I really don't want them to just know me as that person that's always in bed. So I'm not hyperactive. And then there's the word disorder as well, which, it's my brain has a different order. We have different operating systems. And I think that would be a nice way of labeling it. I'm sure we could twist it. Instead of attention deficit, we could talk about the positive. But also, I do think including the disability side in it is, as a few people have said, quite important because it can be a massive disability.
Thank you. Well, that question alone has caused a lot of thought and sort of conversation. So that's very much appreciated. We're going to move on to diagnosis. It's not that easy to get diagnosis, or is it? Historically, in the past, they've been on a waiting list for a long time. So how do we get diagnosis? And secondly, how does the diagnosis of ADHD vary across different age groups and demographics? We'd like to put the hand up for that from the panel. Chris is thinking. Oh, Roxie's got a hand up.
Only because we deal with it all the time. So all the young people that we work with have EHCPs. But I do an awful lot of work with those that come to us wanting a place on the programme that don't have an EHCP because they don't have diagnosis. We talk about it all the time. I'm on meetings all the time. It's disgustingly shocking. Leeds is at 10 years for children currently. So if you put someone in at 10, they're going to be 20 and out the system by the time they actually get a diagnosis. Do they need a diagnosis? Some people do, some people don't. Some people like to label it, some don't. Some class a diagnosis as a label, some don't. And I think that's okay. And I think it's a valid moment that actually everybody has their own experience with it. And I know, hopefully Sam won't mind me saying, she had her own experience with the diagnosis. I am currently going through diagnosis myself. Mine come back to me in a month's time and I will actually be able to tell you. Because I feel it will answer a lot of questions. It will make my lazy moments valid, that actually I'm not lazy. I'm just completely, my brain is just, I'm recharging my batteries, literally. We put our phones on to charge. That's all I'm doing. So with the diagnosis side of things, there are so many different ways of going about it, and so many people give up. There is the right to choose, NHS right to choose, which a lot of people don't know about. If you don't know about it, on the Google NHS right to choose, and it will tell you all about what you can do. And some doctors buy into it, some doctors' practices don't, and will still not refer you. The idea is
you're obliged to, actually.
Say again.
No, I
No,
think you're obliged to. Right to choose is not optional, as far as I'm aware.
it is, unfortunately. Yeah, so this is a challenge we're having with one of our parents who belongs to a particular doctor's surgery, because I thought the same. I didn't think it was optional.
That's interesting.
But if they decide they don't want to refer, they choose their practice doesn't refer, then they don't have to. If you're stuffed, if that's the case, I would, and I have said challenge it.
You can get referred out of area as well, though, actually. So there's ways around that.
Yeah, that's what I've said to the parent is push it, go for it. A lot of people, again, I've just seen one from Lisa in the chat. A lot of people don't know how to go about it. Google actually is really good at telling you how to do it. Some places have places for children. Some actually are so oversubscribed that they don't have that time. And what it does is cuts the waiting list. It means the NHS has to pay for private, and you get to choose where you go, which is fantastic. But at some point, that infinite pot of money is going to not be infinite, or it's going to just run out. It's going to dry up. It's just, I've just had a complete moment of a mind block there. Yeah, that pot of money is going to dry up, and the NHS will stop it again, which is what happened recently about a year or so ago, and it's only just been reopened about a year or so ago. Sam, didn't you go through
and sadly, most of the private organisations are overwhelmed as well now. So some have stopped taking out diagnosis. I think the waiting list for ADHD 360 is about 16 weeks at the moment.
16 to 20 weeks, they say, don't they?
If you go through right to choose, if you go directly privately, you'll get it within a couple of weeks, sadly.
But it's 2.5K, is it still at the moment?
No, it's 500.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's actually a bit more reasonable.
What you need to be careful for anybody thinking of going privately. What you need to be careful is they obviously are trying to push a care plan alongside a diagnosis. So in the very small print, you'll see a diagnosis only and a price for it. So I use ADHD 360 to get a diagnosis for my son. Now, I recommend an organisation called Care ADHD. It's actually run by a director or former director now of SLAM, which is South London and Maudsley Mental Health Trust. So they set up Care ADHD as a way to provide affordable diagnosis and support for ADHD. So their diagnosis is 270, which is still a big chunk of money for a lot of people, but it's nearly half of most of the others. Now, my experience with my eldest son's 17, so he burst in the room and announced that he needed an ADHD diagnosis to support him with his university applications and college work, which is it was his choice. I didn't prompt that, and I think that's the key thing in terms of choosing whether you want a diagnosis. Is it's an individual basis, really, of what value will it add to your life, really. And because the reality is, where you go private, where you go NHS or right to choose, essentially the only option you're going to get is medication. Now, my personal view of medication is similar to antidepressants or drugs of that nature, is that it can help you through a difficult patch, but it's not going to fix anything. It's not going to cure anything. And as Sam mentioned, what it does, it squashes all of your emotions. So, it can turn people into a zombified version of themselves in some way. So you won't feel extremities either way of the emotions. And ultimately, you've got to assess that really in terms of the individual. But I'm a firm believer that looking at the root cause trauma will have a massive difference on your experience. And that's what I've seen for all of my ADHD clients.
Just to clarify that when I was talking about it squashing the emotions and turning little Brian into a zombie, that was in 1996. So that was a very long time ago. I have no not no opinion, but actually no opinion on whether or not people should have medication. I would never say yay or nay either way. I think understanding your ADHD is vital, but I would never recommend that somebody does or doesn't have medication, because it's moved on a lot and I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, I think largely it's not as extreme as it would have been in the 90s, but every medication has a side effect ultimately, and it's whether that side effect is worth it for you, if it has a good enough impact on your life and your
Absolutely.
quality.
But, you know, we don't know people's stories, so you know, I would never express an opinion and advise either way.
Yeah.
With the whole right to choose thing, the one thing that I would say, if you do go privately, is it's really important that you ensure that the private practitioner has shared care opportunities with the NHS. So I know of people who've gone privately for the diagnosis, and then when it's come to the medication side of it, because they did want medication, they were told, they were given a big bill, and they said, well, actually, I'm going to go back to the NHS now. Can you pass all my notes on? And they said, no, these are our notes. We're not passing them on. They had to go through the whole diagnosis process again through the NHS. So if you do anything privately or in combination, please ensure that there is a shared care opportunity if you don't want to pay for all your medication privately.
Thank you. Because there's obviously costs associated. We've had different quotes up to £2,000, from £500 to £2,000, then associated costs in terms of support, and how far that goes as well. Is it in relation to once you've had the diagnosis? Now, where do we go from there? What do we do? Are there interventions, certain treatments that we should look at? Because
this is the real challenge, to be honest. And all of the people I talk to in groups like this, and all my clients, majority of them don't want medication. They've done the research, so they understand the pros and cons, and they just want support to understand. So, you know, the thing I recommend first and foremost is education. Learn about your physiology, understand about your physiology. And one of the key things that we don't do, being neurodiverse, is we can't see the positives. We can't see the incredible things we've done through our neurodiversity. So, you know, through therapy, even coaching, you can really start to recognize that and really start to understand yourself. And it's really about getting the right support that works for you. And you know, every single person who's neurodiverse has had trauma. And go back to that fact of 10,000 more negative feedback experiences by the age of 10. That has a huge impact. So getting the right root cause therapy will have a massive difference. Of course, I would say that being a therapist, but then getting the right coaching support can be massive. So whether that's group support work, whether that's one-to-one coaching, you know, it's about understanding your physiology and how to work with it, how to create the right environment for you to thrive in, building the confidence to be able to have a conversation with the people you work for or with, to say, this is how my mind works and this is what I need to really thrive in this situation, this environment, and this job. Because we have such huge self-worth issues, we just wouldn't be able to do that without some kind of support. And thankfully, businesses are starting to get better now, particularly bigger organizations now are getting feedback that a lot of organizations now to start to engage with all of the staff, not just university staff, to say, okay, what do you need from us to thrive? What do you need from us to be able to do your job in its most effective way? So that's changing, thankfully. And I think the whole process of mental health first aid kind of triggered that and triggered organizations to think a little bit further than mental health first aid and EAPs, employee assistance programs, to go, hang on, that's not really working. What do we need to do now? We need to engage with stuff, we need to engage with people. So the key thing for me, really, in summary, is understanding yourself first and foremost.
I agree with that one. And, you know, as a coach, obviously, I love people to come for coaching. However, not everybody has the funding to go and get anything like that. And actually, as I think Roxie mentioned earlier, there is so much out there on social media at the moment that can help you to understand yourself. So there is nothing wrong with finding somebody on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube who has a really good understanding of all of the different types of symptoms and challenges and strategies for whichever neurodiverse condition that you have, and learn about it, absolutely learn about it. And the other one I would say is we have spent our lives, especially if you're later diagnosis, we've spent our lives with neurotypical people being told that we don't fit in their box. Find your tribe. Find your people, because if you can find people who speak the same language as you, it is liberating. Suddenly you realize that you're not alone. And that's so important for you to know that you aren't broken, that you don't need fixing, that you are perfect as you are. You are just in the wrong gang. That's all.
Yeah. It's a great way to put it, Sam. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting when you see younger kids, they can really struggle in primary because they've got a smaller pool of people, and then when they go to secondary schools, suddenly there's a lot more neurodiverse kids, and often they'll all gravitate towards each other, because what makes us feel safe as humans is when somebody reacts and responds and behaves how we would in any situation. That makes us feel safe. So that's how we end up resonating with people, and that's why everybody in this room who's neurodiverse in any way will have lots of neurodiverse friends.
Oh yeah, like attracts like. I didn't realise I was neurodiverse, but then suddenly turned around and went, "Do you know, all of my clients are neurodiverse." And then
I often have a conversation with my partner about
that is.
who in our lives is neurotypical. I'm not sure anymore.
To be fair, Sam, the first time I met you and we had a chat, you went, "Well, you're neurodivergent, aren't you? You are, aren't you?" I was like, "Am I?" I kind of knew I was, I think. Yeah, we always say, so people are like plants. It's one of the analogies we use. People are like plants, put them in the right environment and they will flourish. We've all got that dead plant in the corner that we don't pay attention to. We forget to water it. It doesn't really, put it on the kitchen windowsill, little, where you're putting water in it, talking to it, stroking its leaves. People, when are no different, put them in the right environment and they will flourish. So we treat everybody as an individual where we are, because it's different, all different types of neurodivergency in our place that we're actually looking at. And Chris, actually, we do something. I'm not saying we do therapy, because we don't. We're not qualified for that bit. We teach. But what we do is we lift that scab. And I say this because they come through school and they have trauma and they have social, emotional, mental health issues. And we get the naughty kids. And I actually love the naughty kid, I'm not going to lie. Because what I love doing is just taking that child, that person, and saying, right, how do you learn? Let's have a look. Okay, why are you behaving in those ways? And we lift the scab and look at what's festering underneath. And then we go, okay, well, what can we do to kind of calm that bit down? And what can we do to soothe that bit? And what would soothe that? And oh, look, that scab's kind of disappearing. And you're now becoming this amazing person, and that you always were, but actually it's coming out because we can see it, because it's no longer got that facade of whatever it may be.
It's a great point to mention the learning, because that's one of the biggest challenges that create trauma in school, is that they only teach in one way: read, write, regurgitate. The measure of success in school is how well you can learn and regurgitate facts. So being ADHD, we're all kinesthetic learners, classified by audible. Read, write, regurgitate is really low on the scale. It goes hand in hand, usually, quite often, with dyslexia and dyspraxia too. So we're just not taught in the right way, and we're made to feel less than because of that. And that's why a lot of people with ADHD find vocational jobs or vocational pastimes, because they learn through doing stuff. I mean, that's why software suited me. We learn through trial and error. That's how we write software. Different now with AI, but in the old days, that's certainly how we wrote software. Does it work? No, try again. Perfect way to suit my physiology and learning. So, and both you and Sam have talked about these kids that just can't sit still. They're full of energy. They need to be outside with their hands dirty, learning through experiencing and running around and getting out in nature and getting their hands in mud and picking up bugs and doing all that kind of stuff. That's how they learn. We're all squeezed in this little tiny box of how we should live our lives, how we should learn, how we should behave. And that box is smaller and tighter for anybody who's neurodiverse. And it's going to create more resistance. It's going to create more pushback, more feedback. more frustration, more anger, more switching off, more daydreaming for Sam and I.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's just going to build and build and build. So,
and like you say, that either goes into, they either become insular because they just go, what's the point actually, because you're going to ask me to write that and then I'm not going to be able to do it, it's frustrating, or they become extrovert where they're frustrated, and that's where you get the upturned tables, destroyed phones, kicking, punching, spitting, running out new moments. And I mean, our first 6 weeks of term is hell on earth, and I'm not gonna lie, I have to really hold on to my staff and nurture them like crazy for the first 6 weeks, because we have young people who come to us who have come out of school and they're going to push every button we've got, but at the same time they sort of say, well, you're making me look like an idiot, and it's like, no, we're not. Really, we're not. What we're trying to do is find your level so that we can teach you the way that you learn. They push the buttons, they expect to be excluded or expelled, or whatever terminology you use. And this isn't just ADHD, this is all the neurodivergence, but the ADHD are the ones that we find are quite often pushing the buttons because of the social, emotional, mental health and the trauma that's come with it. And it is hell on earth until they realise that they're in a different world. I'm not going to stand them in the corridor and shout at them. I'm not going to put them in the head's office. Okay, I might pull them into my office occasionally and sit and have a chat and just go, okay, come on, what's going on? Why? And what do you think I'm going to do when you tell the tutor to or call them the C word or what have you? It's not acceptable, because if you were in work, what would happen? I'd get fired. Yeah. So how are we going to stop that?
Well, that's an interesting point. Is the next question. I'm sure that we can talk a lot more about treatments and interventions. There's only a limited amount of time this evening. Will be something to revisit. So, I just want to mention some of the comments as well. I think Nick Blanchard has a few 4N network individuals who are sort of have a neurodiverse clan or group, and 90%. Neurospices are basically unemployable, or we become our own bosses. Yeah, we all set up for it, and David Aldrich, we all set up for the coming revolution, though. So, you have some superpowers to deal with that. So, there's a question from David again. Can someone explain the difference between the two ways of using the term spectrum, because it causes problems within the whole community? ASD is not a linear scale, so it's 100%. Different type of thing than suggesting it's everyone on the spectrum. That's a good point.
Yeah, 100%. So I watched a great video, David, actually on TikTok. I can't remember who did it, but this lady was stood in front of one of those big range ovens that have a load of knobs on the front, and then they're saying, neurodiversity is not linear, it's not spectrum, as you mentioned, and she's using the dials on the cooker to say, emotional regulation could be +10 or it could be -10. This could be -1, or this could be +5, this could be -6, and everybody's physiology is different. So I always talk about it being a palette. We're a little bit blue, a little bit red, a huge amount of purple, a huge amount of yellow. Here's a diagram I chose earlier. So this is like a linear representation. Really, it should be donut, I guess, but this is neurotypical. It's, oops, I'm moving that. I didn't want to move it. So this bit in the middle is neurotypical, but there's no single definition of neurotypical. Again, neurotypical is a scale within that palette of behaviors, and we're just on the edges, the fringes of this spectrum, if you do describe it as a linear thing. And so, it's helping people understand that there is no single definition of autism. There is no single definition of ADHD. It's more complicated than that. It's more diverse than that. Within diversity, there's even more diversity, right? And that what that gives is people with much more extreme gifts, much more extreme positive things that they can bring to the world. And again, it's just finding the right environment you can thrive in. And I came from the IT industry. I used to run software development teams for big healthcare companies, and the team of 65, I would estimate more than half of them were probably neurodiverse, particularly in the software team. And most of those didn't know, but it attracts that kind of mindset, the autism skills, where they can really hyper focus and get diligent on detail and see things from very different perspectives and think very quickly. the ADHD mindset is usually more creative. It's able to come up with much more diverse ideas and ways of solving problems, prolific problem solvers. So, these are skills that the world needs. These are skills that organizations should be looking and seeking. And the reality is, the world would be a very boring place. We wouldn't be sat doing the things we do, using the technology we do, if it wasn't for neurodiversity. I saw a great video on TikTok where a guy was saying, the first person that looked at that cow and thought, I'm going to yank on that teat and taste it, that's not a neurotypical way of thinking. I love that example. I love it. But yeah, it really is helping people realize that we wouldn't get here if we hadn't had neurodiversity in the world.
As Chris never realised we're going to get down that road of cows. But
I mean, to some degree, aren't the titles being used? Aren't they a convenience thing? Aren't they used by educationalists? Aren't they used by the NHS as a way of putting people into boxes so that they can provide care, so that they can help us?
It's a way of understanding, isn't it? Of allowing people to understand. Like you say, it is a way of being able to provide care. You have to have. I think if everybody was taken as an individual, the NHS would be even more broken than it is now. And we have to have a way of dealing with things in those certain ways. I think that's for me. And you talk about the different languages and everything else. The one for me is, I talk to businesses about language quite often because they're very frightened of it and they're very scared of you saying the wrong thing to someone who's autistic, or actually, do they have autism? What do I say? I don't want to offend them. Actually, you say it and caveat it with, do you know what? I might get this wrong, but please educate me. And as long as you're open, but it's the neurodivergent, neurodiverse, and neurotypical that it is really difficult. It's a newish thing. In general, neurodiverse was the thing that was picked up, and actually every single one of us neurodiverse, because there is not one single brain that's the same as another in the whole wide world. There is an ever so slightly physical, I can't say it, difference. There are differences in the brains. So for some reason, it's no different to the spectrum thing, Dave, like you were just saying about having to put people in a box. So we do have this sort of cut-off point of neurodivergent, which is your learning disability, difficulty, autism, those kind of things, and the way that the brain works in a different path, to those that they have studied many years before, who are what are classed as neurotypical, which is your standard, straightforward brain. I do think, and this goes back to diagnosis, I think, quite a bit as well, I do think that those two things are starting to merge. I don't think there's a bit in the middle, a line anymore. I don't think you can do that anymore because, again, more people are being diagnosed as neurodivergent. And are we taking over the neurotypicals? Are we, are they going to become the minority? How's that going to work? So this spectrum palette, I love, Chris, where you said about the palette. For me, that works. That completely works. And you pick a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and then that's that and the other. And oh my gosh, you've got this wonderful rose in front of you and this beautiful person blossoming and everything else. That really works for me. One of the analogies we use, going back to businesses, again, because businesses are scared, because it used to be a tick box exercise, and it isn't a tick box exercise, inclusivity. And one of the things we use, and one of the analogies we use, is about an engine. Some of you might have heard this before. It's one of my favorites, but it explains it really well. Businesses and, well, anything is like an engine. The world is like an engine. It needs different parts of different shapes, different sizes, different colors, working at different speeds, doing different things to make it work. Your creative side, I'm going to get absolutely slated to use some very generic stereotypical terms, but look at your marketing department and guarantee you there's somebody with ADHD in there, because ADHD does tend to lend itself to creativity, not all the time. Look at your IT department, your accounts department. I can guarantee there's somebody with autism in there, if not quite a lot more, because they don't have to people. Again, a lot of people with autism don't like to people, or can't, just aren't comfortable with that. They like to think in spreadsheets, numbers, however it works. But we need to think of things like an engine. You know, we accept if our car's not working, we look at what's missing, what's not right, what needs support. But we don't tend to look at our businesses or our schools or our homes even sometimes. You know, we should be. We really should be.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Roxie. And David, sadly, yeah, I think there has to be a way of grouping individuals to allow us to give them the right support. And that's the same in anything in mental health. You know, when you look at the diagnosis criteria for other mental health conditions, they're surprisingly vague in some cases, worryingly vague in some cases. And it's just a way to try and put people on the right care plan, essentially, through the NHS. So it's a necessarily evil, I think, ultimately, sometimes.
Thank you. Just we're going to move on now to, so we've got individuals that may impact their relationships or the personal, professional relationships. How do we best support these individuals? It's a challenging situation if they've just been diagnosed or they're going through the symptoms of ADHD, and then it's maybe impacting on relationships in the family, personal relationships or work. Because Chris, you've gone through that.
So I think it has to start with open communication, and you know, we've got to come from a source of empathy to try and understand people's experiences and recognize that other people's experiences are not our own experiences. You know, my 10 out of 10 for anxiety could be Sam's 3 out of 10 for anxiety. You know, until you've been to that extremity and you've got to that point where you can't switch it off and you can't stop it and it's just running and running and running, you can't resonate with somebody else who's trying to explain it to you because you've never experienced it. So it has to come from a source of understanding what somebody's challenges are, what somebody's problems are, what they struggle with, how they experience life, and try and understand that at an empathetic level and not minimize their experience. And this is why it's dangerous. You know, when we say, oh, everybody's on the spectrum somewhere, you're minimizing the experience of people who are on the extremities of that spectrum. So it's all about open engagement to understand what do you need in this situation? What do you need in this environment? How can I best support you in this situation? It's got to be open conversations around that ultimately.
Thank you. Who else like to comment on that? How do we best support? Yes.
So, having just instantly forgotten what I was going to say.
Tell the bread story.
We've all done that.
Tell the bread story, because actually that is amazing and it works, and everybody I think will get it.
Okay. So this was not, I mean, it obviously was an ADHD thing because I was undiagnosed. I was off with stress, and my husband was looking after our children. So I was off work, couldn't do anything at all. I was just not functioning at all. My husband was doing everything. He was dropping the boys off at school, then going to work, coming back early to pick them up, sorting them, listening to them read, getting them ready for bed, cooking their dinner, getting their lunches ready, looking after me as well. And he was exhausted. And he'd put the boys to bed one night and he came in and he said, we've got no bread. He just came into the living room and said, we've got no bread. And I instantly heard, you complete and utter useless waste of space. Sat on your ass doing nothing all day. I'm doing absolutely bloody everything. And now I'm trying to get their lunches ready for tomorrow after I've put them to bed. And you haven't even bought bread. And I had a moment of wisdom where I actually said to him, can I tell you what I've just heard? And I told him. And I said, what did you mean? And he went, we've got no bread. He's a simple type. And as soon as he said that, all of my anger fell away and all of my problem fell away. And I suddenly went, oh, we've got those mini sausage rolls in the freezer, just get those out. And I actually went and got them out. First time I'd got off the sofa in ages, got them out and cooked them because it fell away. And it's an example of how the story in our head is so different often to what somebody else says. So where Chris says it's clarifying the level of anxiety and what that means. there is an awful lot of support out there for the neurodiverse person. There is very little support out there for the families of neurodiverse people. And as Chris said, it's the communication that's massive. But the problem is, if you go to somebody who is neurodiverse and say, what do you need? Quite often they'll go, I don't know. They just don't know. So for me, what's needed is support for the families as well, but also those families being a little bit proactive, which I'm sure they are, in learning about it. I have a client, she's only 13, no, she's 15, and she's neurodiverse. And her mum has joined my neurodiverse WhatsApp group just so that she can hear all the conversations and hear what's going on, so that she can support her daughter now that she's found out that she's got a very different brain. And she's come back to me and said, they're all so different. How do I know which one my daughter is? And I said, you don't. You just have to take her every day at where she's at, and recognize that you have different operating systems, and that when you're sat opposite her and you see a 6, she sees a 9. And the thing that the neurotypical world does is it says, so I've got a 6 here, you don't fit here, you don't see this 6, so you need to come around here and see this. But the neurodiverse person is there going, but it's a 9, it's a 9, I can see the 9ness of it, it's a 9. So they're not going to come around and see the 6. It's the job of the neurotypicals to say, tell me what that 9 means for you. Tell me how that is for you, and to understand that. Now, for me, if somebody says to me, tell me how that is for you, all of my barriers come down. I'll tell them how it is for me, but it makes me so much more open because I've been heard, I've been valued. It then makes me open to going around and saying, okay, you're weird 6ers, tell me what the 6 looks like for you. And then we get the communication and we start to understand each other.
It's a beautiful analogy, the 6 and the 9. I use a beach ball analogy. You know, it's different colours from different size. Both perspectives are valid. They're just different. Just different.
I like that.
Abalone shell is the other one. An abalone shell is the other one because it's ugly on one side and it's beautiful on the other.
Another great analogy, actually.
Yeah, but who's ugly and who's beautiful? Because then we'd just be fighting over that one.
And it's just perspective, isn't it? It's just perspective. Yeah, different perspectives.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, you know, evidently you're not a coach that does this, Sam, but a lot of ADHD coaches spend their time trying to teach neurodiverse people to be neurotypical, and that's only ever going to create more resistance. You know, we've got to learn how to live in a neurotypical world that's not designed for us, but you know, trying to
lifetime being told to be neurotypical.
Exactly.
You don't need to fit into a box, is what we say. You've just got to fit into this weird sphere that we all live in.
It's time to embrace how your physiology works and be comfortable with that, and that's where the trauma work comes in, to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to be ourselves, to be our crazy, wacky, weird, wonderful, divergent selves in any situation.
And actually, my husband said only this weekend, actually, he said, you know, when you first got your diagnosis and you started just relaxing and saying things a little bit more and behaving in a different way, he said, his first reaction, he said, don't shoot me for this, but my first reaction is, you're playing on the ADHD-ness now. You're absolutely playing on it because you're upping your ADHD-ness. And he said, I never said anything because I knew there was something I needed to process there. I coach all my family and I'm so proud of how they're learning this. And then he eventually came back to himself and went, she's not playing on her ADHD-ness. She's taken that bloody awful mask on of trying to fit in and be neurotypical. She's allowing herself to be her beautiful self. And now that she's allowing herself, I'm seeing the real Sam. Thankfully, he still loves me. But yeah, that's another thing that happens when somebody gets, especially a later in life diagnosis, and they go, whoa, right, I'm going to be me now.
Yeah, 100%.
And people say, why are you playing up on it? Why have you suddenly become so ADHD?
I've just
Provided
spotted
for
a really good question in the chat, and I'm realising, Raj,
Yeah,
we're
that
kind of
was-
off
that
time,
was
but
the
that's a fantastic question from Alison.
Yeah, this is the question I was going to ask. This disassociation, if you're trying to help somebody but they're disassociated with their ADHD, and unless you want to express it any differently, Ali.
Hi. Yeah, fascinated what Chris was just saying about the anxiety, because that's speaking on behalf of our son, who's adult, recently diagnosed, and just trying to help him navigate through new fatherhood and the effect that all the anxiety he has around life and dealing with his ADHD. I love him to bits. From a theoretical point of view, I can totally understand, because I've worked associated with the field of some years ago, so I can separate myself from it. But living with it, it's just so frustrating. And then because he won't listen, well, as he won't listen, he finds it difficult to quell his anxiety levels enough to take on the support that we want to offer him.
I think
You saw three of us straight in.
So with
I'm going to hand that one over to Chris and Sam. I was just going to say, be kind. Be kind to yourself, be kind to them.
Yeah. I think what I'll say, first of all, just forgive me if I'm teaching me to eggs, but what anxiety is, just fight or flight, right? So it's just your body feels unsafe in that moment. So when you get to the extremity of that, essentially, anytime you're in emotional distress, your body reacts the same way as physical fear. It creates anxiety is just adrenaline being pumped into the body, increases your blood pressure, heart rate, creates tension, all that kind of stuff. Cortisol blocks the rational thought process to enable your subconscious to take over instinctively in danger. But when that's in anybody for continued amounts of time, it creates brain fog, confusion, and short-term memory issues. So you literally can't think straight, you can't rationalize that anxiety. So essentially, every time a fear is created, it's never cancelled because it's survival. You don't forget something's dangerous. And every time it gets triggered, it gets pushed up in strength. Then a big event might happen. It catapults that fear further forward. Then we might have the kind of things we associate with the word trauma. It pours petrol on the fire of that fear. And so we all suffer an element of PTSD essentially for that reason. So when we come out of the danger, our body doesn't cancel the fear. And it uses all of our senses when to trigger a fear. So we can be left suddenly in hyper anxiety thinking, what the hell triggered that? I don't understand. There was nothing I can associate with that trigger because it's something you see, hear, smell, taste, touch. And when you're in that moment, if it's gone to an extremity, it's gone over a threshold, you're not going to be able to get it back again. You've got to allow that train to kind of come to a rest, essentially. Obviously, you should have said a runaway train analogy there. But that's all anxiety is. So, for your son, it's learning what those triggers are. It's learning some coping mechanism to avoid that. And what a lot of people in university struggle with more on the autistic side is we stuff everything in so much because we're masking, we're hiding, we're struggling to try and understand how to react in a situation. Obviously, it's just like a pressure cooker, and sometimes it just goes off. And then once that's out, then we come back to a normal level of being and acting again. So really, it's about understanding those root cause triggers, and that's what I specialize in. It's finding all those original start points for the trauma, the fears. So subconscious can recognize that fear doesn't serve me a purpose anymore. I can release, I can let go of that. And there's a lot of amazing coping mechanisms out there. What's great for ADHD is meditation. Even if you think you can't sit still, it works fantastically. I've never had anybody in my chair I can't get into a deep state of relaxation. Cold showers are fantastic for ADHD. Just gives us a massive dose of endorphins, which are like a magic pill. Same with exercise. It's just getting into those healthier routines, healthier patterns of behavior can help with the anxiety really well. And there's lots of great supplements out there that can help. But ultimately, I'm a firm believer that dealing with root cause trauma will massively help everybody who's new to this.
Thank you, Chris. Sam, your last
So
word.
I'm not, Chris, I could listen to you all night. You're just so, you do all the sciencey stuff I don't do. You're really clever. So I don't do the root cause stuff because I'm not that clever. Instead, the thing that I do is I compare an anxiety or panic attack to when you are angry. So when you're really, really angry and somebody says, you need to calm down, how many times do you go, oh, thank you, Zen. That's exactly what I needed to hear. You don't. Instead, you go, I want to hit you, because being told to calm down doesn't work. The same thing for me with anxiety is we look in the wrong direction. And I'm not talking about what Chris is saying, because Chris does the deep work, but on a more shallow basis. We look in the wrong direction. We look to calm the person down. So we're calming the thinking down. Whereas instead, I focus very much on the feeling. And because if you're feeling angry, like Chris says, fight or flight, that's an anger response again. Same with anxiety. It's a feeling that you're having, and you're not going to calm it down and stop it by rationalizing it, because you are in that position where you can't think. So trying to calm somebody down who's feeling anxious is like pouring petrol on a fire. It's just going to exacerbate it. Instead, embrace it, because it is a beautiful signal that they are responding to their overthinking. It's how their body needs to be at that moment. And when we try and stop it, we fight against it. So you've got, this is how I feel and this is how I should feel, and they're in conflict. We try and take away how I feel. Well, we can't stop a feeling by thinking, because the two don't work together. But if we take away how we think we should feel and we just allow ourselves to feel, not allowing ourselves to feel so it goes, but allowing ourselves to feel and going, this is how I need to be at the moment. There's nothing wrong with this. There is nothing wrong with my feelings. The story I allocate to it is the bit I need to just let dissipate. The feeling itself, it will pass, just because it always does, like the tide. It ebbs and flows if we just don't pay attention, but trying to stop it is like pushing the tide out with a broom.
Yeah.
Work. So I have a very different way. You know, counsellors try and get you to think about it. I get you to actually stop thinking, focus on the feeling, find it, embrace it, and just breathe into it and let it be. Is my way.
Thank you. Hopefully, Alison, that has given you some ideas. Now we come to the end of our roundtable series this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure to have our panel. So I really wanted to thank the audience for your participation and your questions and comments. And this is recorded. And thank you to Chris Marsh. You can get hold of him in all his different ways of describing ADHD and anxiety. And as a coach, if you need to get hold of him, I'm sure you can put the details within the chat. Roxie Coleman, who does the training up in Bradford. So really appreciate your time. Sam Munslow, another fantastic coach. So if you want to get in touch with her, then I'm sure she can support you in some way. And Nick Blatchley, copywriter. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you would like a recording, just send me your email address. I should already have it. If not, send it to me and I'll send you the details for the recording. We're going to have another one of these on different topics every couple of months. So just look out for them. And by all means, reach out to us for help and support. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for this, Raj.
Thanks,
everybody.
Raj.
Thank you, Raj.